A simple act of kindness can change everything. When Danny Mason, a mechanic with a heart as big as his hands, stops to help a woman stranded on the side of the road, he never imagines how much it will alter his life. She's just another stranger with a broken SUV until he finds out she owns his entire world. The garage he's spent his life running, the one he's poured every ounce of sweat into, is now in her hands. But will Danny's pride and loyalty lead him to fight for what's his? Or will this unexpected twist tear everything apart? Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Danny Mason had always known the scent of oil, grease, and burnt rubber better than he knew the smell of fresh cut grass or a home-cooked meal. His garage was his sanctuary, tucked away in a quiet corner of town, far from the bustling chaos that seemed to swallow everyone else whole. It wasn't much. Cracked pavement, a few oil stains on the floor, old tools that had seen better days, but it was his. It had been his since he was 18. A man could carve out a life in a place like this, away from the noise of the world, hidden in the hum of engines and the rhythm of a wrench turning. He sat on the worn stool by the back counter, wiping the sweat off his brow, hands still slick from the engine he'd just worked on. It was the end of another long day, but Danny had never been one to leave until everything was in place, until he could look around and see the shop still standing, still breathing, still his. The day's light had already faded, and the sharp fluorescent lights above buzzed against the quiet night. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another reminder of the life outside his little bubble. He sighed, pulling it out to check the message. His brother Tom had messaged him about a few overdue bills, nothing Danny didn't already know. He had been fighting for every penny for the last year, ever since business had slowed down and people stopped coming in like they used to. It wasn't just the money, it was the creeping feeling that he was losing the thing that had kept him going for so long. The door chime jingled, cutting through his thoughts. He looked up, expecting one of the regulars, another person desperate for cheap repairs and a friendly face. Instead, standing in the doorway was a woman, tall, with dark hair pulled back into a ponytail, wearing a thick coat that looked far too nice for the cold evening air. Her eyes met his with an air of urgency, her face flushed with frustration. "My SUV broke down on the highway," she said, her voice tinged with impatience. "Can you help me?" Danny stood up slowly, instinctively wiping his hands on his grease-stained overalls. This wasn't his usual kind of customer. "Sure, pop the hood, and let's see what we're working with." She hesitated, biting her lip, clearly trying to decide whether or not to trust him. But after a moment she reached into her bag and pulled out the keys. "It's just up the road," she said. "I'll wait inside." "All right," Danny replied, walking toward the door to grab his tools. When he arrived at the SUV, he felt a flicker of surprise. It was a high-end model, something that would cost more than the entire shop's worth if it were totaled. He'd worked on plenty of cars in his life, but never anything like this. His fingers ran over the hood, feeling the heat radiating from the engine. A quick check confirmed the problem, a broken alternator belt. It was an easy fix, but he didn't expect it to be something he'd do for free. He returned to the garage, taking the woman's keys and heading back outside. She had gone inside the shop, pacing nervously. "Don't worry," Danny said, trying to offer a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It'll be an hour or so. You can wait inside if you want. It's warm." Her eyes shifted to the cluttered shop, then back to him, clearly unsure. But after a moment she nodded, her posture relaxing. "Thanks, I appreciate it." She took a seat in the corner, her eyes scanning the garage as if it were a place completely foreign to her. Danny got to work, his hands moving methodically as he worked on the engine. It was routine for him. He was good at it. And for a moment, he let himself forget about the bills piling up, about the looming uncertainty of his future. The quiet hum of the garage was broken only by the sound of his wrench turning, the soft thrum of the engine as it came back to life. As Danny tightened the final bolt on the alternator, he glanced over at the woman sitting in the corner. She hadn't moved much, still watching him with that same guarded expression. She didn't look like someone who'd be caught dead in a place like this, surrounded by old oil cans and rusted metal parts. Yet, here she was, waiting for him to finish what he'd started. The air between them had been thick with silence, the kind that made it hard for Danny to know what to say. He wasn't the kind of guy who spoke much. He let his work do the talking for him. But there was something about her, something that piqued his curiosity. She had a certain air about her, a confidence that clashed with the humdrum atmosphere of the garage. She wasn't nervous about being here, even though she clearly wasn't from around these parts. She wasn't the type to fidget or check her phone every few minutes. She just sat there, waiting for him to finish the job. When the engine finally turned over, Danny closed the hood and wiped his hands on his overalls. He turned toward her, ready to offer his usual line of, "That'll be $100, no more, no less." But something about her gaze stopped him. It wasn't like the usual gratitude he got from his regular customers. No, there was something more here, a quiet intensity in her eyes that made Danny feel like she was sizing him up. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, standing and walking toward him with a purposeful stride. Her voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like the rough-and-tumble talk he was used to. Danny didn't even flinch as she pulled out a sleek wallet, but when she opened it, revealing a credit card that looked more expensive than anything he'd ever owned, he hesitated. "It's on the house," he said, trying to hide the irritation in his voice. "Just pay it forward sometime." She paused for a beat, eyes narrowing just slightly, before tucking the wallet back into her bag. There was something about the way she did it, almost as if she had expected him to charge her, like she wasn't used to anyone turning down her money. "All right," she said, her tone softer now, almost regretful. "Well, I can at least offer you my number, if you ever need anything." Danny shook his head, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "I'm good. Just get home safe." She studied him for a moment, a flash of something unreadable passing over her face, before she nodded, backing toward the door. "Thanks again," she said, her voice steady. "You've saved my day." Danny watched as she climbed into the SUV and pulled away. He wiped his hands on the rag again, standing still for a moment, letting the quiet of the garage settle around him. Something about her had bothered him, though he couldn't place why. She wasn't just any rich woman passing through. He could feel it. There was more to her than she was letting on. But that didn't concern him. He'd seen all kinds of people come and go through this shop. He wasn't interested in their lives, only their cars. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. The days following Sarah's visit passed in much the same way as every other day before. Danny worked on cars, fixed what was broken, greeted the occasional customer, and tried to ignore the mounting bills that weighed heavily on his mind. The garage was quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. But despite the routine, there was something in the back of his mind that kept nagging at him. Sarah. He couldn't get her out of his head. It wasn't just the way she had looked at him, like she saw something more than a mechanic covered in grease. It was the way she seemed completely out of place in his world. The thought of her lingered in his mind, but Danny pushed it aside. He had work to do, real work. The garage wasn't going to fix itself. But then, a few days later, she walked back through the door. It was a typical Tuesday morning when the bell above the door jingled, and Danny looked up expecting another regular. But when he saw Sarah standing there, a small smile playing on her lips, he felt his stomach tighten. "I didn't expect to see you again," Danny said, trying to keep his voice casual, but it came out sounding more guarded than he intended. "I've got a problem," she said, stepping into the shop with an air of confidence. "My car's acting up again. Can you take a look?" Danny felt the familiar sting of frustration. He hadn't expected this. She'd left the other day as if he was just another mechanic to her, another service to check off her list. But now she was back. and something about it felt different. "Sure," he replied, his voice flat. "Pop the hood, and I'll take a look." She did as instructed, walking over to the car and popping the hood with a swift pull. The sound of the engine rattling inside echoed in the small garage, filling the space with an uncomfortable noise. Danny walked toward her, trying to focus on the task at hand. But he couldn't stop himself from wondering why she was back. As Danny worked, Sarah hovered nearby, watching him with that same quiet intensity. Every now and then their eyes would meet, and Danny would quickly look away, trying to focus on the task. But the tension in the air between them was impossible to ignore. "So what brings you back here?" Danny asked, trying to keep the conversation light, even though he didn't really want to know the answer. Sarah seemed to think for a moment before replying. I'm here because I don't trust anyone else to fix it." Danny raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "You don't trust anyone else? Not even a high-end mechanic in the city?" She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. "No, not really. I trust you." Danny froze, his hand still gripping the wrench. Her words lingered in the air between them, making it impossible to ignore the tension that had been building. He wasn't sure if it was her sincerity that threw him off, or if it was something else entirely. He finished the repairs and closed the hood, wiping his hands on his rag. "It's all set," he said gruffly, trying to hide the fact that he was still shaken by her words. "Thanks," she said quietly, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she stepped back toward the counter. "How much do I owe you?" Danny shrugged, still caught up in the moment. "Nothing." Sarah didn't argue this time. Instead, she nodded. "All right. Well, I guess I'll be going. Thanks again, Danny." As she turned to leave, Danny couldn't help but feel a strange sense of emptiness. There was something about her, something that unsettled him in a way he wasn't used to. But whatever it was, he had no idea how to deal with it. The days passed slowly in the garage after Sarah left. Danny tried to shake off the feeling of unease she'd left behind, but it clung to him like grease on his hands. Each morning, as he opened the garage doors, the silence seemed heavier. Business was steady, but not as busy as it used to be. Customers came in for repairs, but the shop lacked the kind of rush Danny had once known. He could tell something was changing, but he wasn't sure what. Every time he looked at his empty workbench or saw an old invoice, the weight of the bills, of the impending sale of the garage, pressed on him even harder. One afternoon, as he wiped the oil off his hands and leaned against the counter, the door chimed again. This time it wasn't Sarah. It was Tom, the shop's longtime owner and Danny's only remaining link to the past. Tom walked in with a grim look on his face, the kind that made Danny's stomach twist. "You get the letter, kid?" Tom asked, his voice gravelly with age. Danny didn't need to ask. He already knew what letter Tom was talking about. "Yeah, the one from the bank. I got it." "Bad news," Tom continued, rubbing a hand over his thinning hair. "They're still pressing for the sale. You've got to sign those papers by the end of the week, or they'll start foreclosing on the property." Danny nodded, his stomach tightening. "I know, but I'm not ready to give up on this place, Tom. There's got to be something else we can do." Tom shook his head, looking exhausted. "I don't know, Danny. The numbers don't lie. This place, it's not what it used to be. You're good with your hands, but this, it's out of your control now." The words stung, but Danny refused to let them break him. He couldn't. Not yet. "I'll figure it out. I'm not giving up." Tom looked at him for a moment longer, then sighed. "You're a good kid, Danny, but you've got to face reality sooner or later." Tom left the shop after that, and Danny was left standing in the middle of the cluttered garage, the hum of the lights above the only sound. Reality was closing in on him, and he couldn't deny it anymore. But that didn't mean he was going to lie down and let it happen. He had one thing left, his pride. Danny's resolve was tested the following morning when Sarah walked in again. She wasn't here for a repair this time. She was here for business. Danny could see it in the way she walked into the shop, eyes sharp and focused. "I've been thinking about this," she began, her voice steady and calm, "and I think I can help you out." Danny raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Help me out? What are you talking about?" "I'm serious, Danny," she continued, moving toward the desk. "I know things are tight around here. You're struggling to keep the shop open, right?" He didn't respond, but she could see it in his eyes. "I've been talking to the bank. I've got connections that can make sure you don't lose the garage." Danny clenched his jaw. "And why would you want to do that?" She leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "Because I want to buy it. I've seen what this place means to you, but it's not going to last much longer if you keep running it the way you have." Her words hit harder than he expected. He took a step back, crossing his arms. "You want to buy it? You don't know anything about this place, Sarah. You're just a city girl with too much money and too many plans." "I know more than you think," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm offering you a way out, a way to save what you've worked for." Danny felt his heart race, a mix of anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. "And what's in it for you? Why would you care?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I see potential here. More than just cars, this garage could be something bigger. Something that blends the old with the new." Danny's chest tightened, the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. "And what? You'll come in, buy it, and run it like it's another one of your investments?" "I'll bring in new equipment, new staff, new ideas," she said, stepping closer. "But the heart of this place, Danny, that's yours. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to let me help you. We can do this together." Danny stood there, fighting the overwhelming urge to yell at her. He hated how calm she was, how easily she seemed to have all the answers. But a part of him couldn't help but listen to her, even if he didn't want to admit it. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice low. "I'm not sure I can trust you." "I'm not asking for your trust," Sarah said softly. "I'm asking for a chance to save this place." Danny looked at her, his mind racing. He had never been good with change. But this was different. The garage was his life. He couldn't let it slip away. "I'll think about it," he said finally, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. The next few days were a blur of indecision. Danny couldn't focus. The garage felt smaller, the weight of his decisions making the space feel even more suffocating. Every time he walked through the door, his eyes went straight to the piles of unpaid bills. He knew Sarah was right. Things couldn't keep going the way they were. But was selling to her the answer? It felt like giving up. Yet, deep down, Danny knew that doing nothing was just as bad as throwing in the towel. He was at a crossroads, and the pressure was overwhelming. Late one night, after closing up the shop, Danny stood on the rooftop of the garage, staring out over the quiet town. He couldn't remember the last time he had a moment to himself. The world felt like it was pressing in on him, and he needed an answer. He needed something to hold on to. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Danny," the message began, "I know this is hard, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, you won't be alone in this. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Just let me know when you're ready to talk." Danny stared at the message, the words burning into his brain. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but he also knew that if he didn't take action soon, he'd lose everything. His mind raced. He had one more shot, one more chance to make this work. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the garage. Danny was already there, his hands clenched into fists as he worked on a car in the corner. When he heard the door open, he didn't look up. "Danny," Sarah said, walking over to where he stood, "we need to talk." He didn't answer, but he didn't push her away either. Sarah stood next to him, waiting for him to say something. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're right, I can't keep doing this on my own." She nodded, her gaze steady. "You don't have to. I'm here to help." Danny looked at her, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "So what's the plan?" "I'll take over the ownership, but I want you to stay on. You'll be in charge of the day-to-day operations. I'm not here to take this place away from you. I'm here to help you grow it." Danny stared at her for a long moment, trying to read her expression. "And why should I trust you?" "Because I see something in you, Danny," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "I see the passion you have for this place, and I think we can build something together." Danny felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, hope. It wasn't the answer he'd been looking for, but it was the one he needed. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." The first few weeks were difficult. There were so many things to figure out: new contracts, new systems, new equipment. Danny felt like he was drowning in paperwork and meetings, while Sarah handled the big picture stuff. But as they worked together, things started to improve. The garage grew more organized and business picked up. However, as they spent more time together, something else began to happen. Danny started to notice Sarah more, not just as his business partner, but as something else entirely. There were moments when their conversations lingered a little longer, when their eyes met for just a second too long. He couldn't deny it anymore. He was attracted to her. But he didn't know what to do with it. She was his boss, his partner in the garage. They couldn't cross that line. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. As the weeks dragged on, Danny began to settle into the new routine. The garage, once chaotic and disorganized, was running smoothly under Sarah's guidance. New clients came in, drawn by the fresh professionalism that now defined the place. Sarah's business savvy was a breath of fresh air, and slowly but surely, things were looking up. Danny found himself spending more time with Sarah, not just discussing business but talking about life, their pasts, and even their hopes for the future. It was during one of these late-night conversations, sitting on the worn-out couch in the break room, that things took a turn. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter than usual. Her fingers drummed lightly on the coffee mug in her hand. Danny took a long sip of his beer before replying. "What do you mean?" "Before all this," she said, gesturing to the shop, "before we got to this point. What if you had done things differently? What if we had different lives?" Danny paused, looking at her intently. He knew she wasn't just talking about the garage now. She was talking about him. "I don't know," he replied slowly. "I guess I've always just done what I had to do. You know, fix things, make sure everything stayed running. I didn't really think too much about anything else." Sarah nodded, her eyes far away, as if lost in thought. "Yeah, I get that," she said softly. "I used to think like that too, but now I wonder if I'm just running away from what really matters." Danny felt a pang in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation. There was something about her vulnerability that struck a chord in him, something he hadn't expected from the woman who had seemed so confident, so untouchable when she first walked into the garage. "I don't think you're running away," Danny said gently. "I think you're just finding your way. We all are." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Sarah's gaze met his, and for a brief moment everything else seemed to fade. There was no shop, no deadlines, no bills, just two people, sitting in the quiet of the night, sharing a moment of understanding. She smiled, though it was faint. "Thanks, Danny. That means more than you know." He nodded, unsure of what else to say. They sat in silence for a while longer, until the weight of the moment began to feel too heavy. Sarah eventually stood, brushing herself off. "I should get going," she said, her tone changing, though it wasn't quite as cold as usual. "Early day tomorrow." "Yeah," Danny replied, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "We've got work to do." Sarah turned to leave, but then stopped at the door, looking back at him. "You're a good man, Danny. Don't forget that." With that, she was gone, leaving Danny to stare at the empty space where she had been, her words echoing in his mind. The days that followed were a blur of business and personal conflict. As the garage continued to grow under Sarah's leadership, Danny found himself caught between two worlds, one where he was still the mechanic he had always been, and another where he was becoming something else entirely. He didn't know how to reconcile the two. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to glide effortlessly between both worlds. She had a way of making everything seem so easy, so natural. And every time Danny found himself caught up in the tension of it all, she was there to smooth things over, to reassure him that everything would be okay. But it wasn't okay, not entirely. The more he worked with her, the more Danny's feelings for Sarah deepened. He tried to ignore it, tried to bury the attraction that simmered beneath the surface, but it was always there, just out of reach. Every time they worked side by side, every time they laughed at a joke or shared a quiet moment, it grew harder to deny. One afternoon, as they worked late into the evening, Sarah stood next to him at the car lift, discussing the finer details of a new project. He could feel her presence next to him, and for the first time, he didn't want to push it away. Instead, he found himself drawn to her, wanting more of the connection they'd shared over the past few weeks. "You know, I never really thought this place could be something more," Danny said quietly, his voice low as he wiped his hands on a rag. "But now, I'm starting to see it differently." Sarah glanced at him, her expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied, her voice sincere. "I've always believed in this place, Danny, and I believe in you." There it was again, their eyes locking, the unspoken understanding between them. Danny felt a flutter in his chest, but he quickly looked away, focusing on the car in front of him. "I'm just doing my part," he said, his tone gruff, though he didn't entirely believe it. "But I appreciate you giving me the chance to do it." Sarah smiled, her eyes warm. "You've earned it, Danny. You've earned more than just a chance." For a moment it felt like everything was falling into place, but just as quickly the moment was shattered by the sound of the phone ringing in the office. Sarah stepped away to answer it, her back turned to him. Danny exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders. He couldn't do this. He couldn't keep pretending like he didn't feel something more for her. It was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The tension in the air between Danny and Sarah grew palpable over the next few days. They were both working harder than ever, trying to make the garage a success, but the unspoken attraction between them was becoming too much to ignore. Danny tried to keep his distance. He focused on the cars, on the business, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore the pull he felt toward Sarah. Every time she smiled at him, every time their hands brushed as they worked side by side, it sent a jolt through him. He couldn't deny it any longer. It all came to a head one night when Sarah invited him out for a drink after work. They sat at a small bar down the street, the atmosphere quiet and relaxed, as they shared a few laughs over drinks. "I never imagined this place would be so much work," Sarah admitted, shaking her head as she took a sip of her wine. "I thought I was prepared for it, but I don't think I truly understood what I was getting into." Danny smiled, leaning back in his chair. "You seem to have everything under control. I'm just trying to keep up." Sarah looked at him, her eyes softer than they'd been before. "You're doing more than keeping up, Danny. You're helping make this place what it is." The words lingered in the air between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then, in a quiet voice, Sarah added, "You know, I've never met anyone like you. You've got this quiet strength. It's hard to find people like that." Danny's heart raced. He knew he shouldn't feel this way. She was his boss, his partner in this business. But in that moment, everything else seemed to fall away. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, his voice low. "No," Sarah said, leaning in closer. "You're doing more than that. You're part of something bigger. You're making this place your own." Danny's breath caught in his throat, and for a brief moment their eyes locked, the world around them fading away. He could feel the heat of her gaze, the chemistry between them undeniable. Before he could say anything, the moment was broken by the sound of his phone ringing. He glanced down at it, seeing an incoming call from his brother. "Sorry, I have to take this," he said, standing up quickly. He walked outside, his heart still pounding in his chest. The following day, Danny found himself in the back of the shop, working on a car while his mind wandered back to the night before. The conversation with Sarah lingered in his thoughts, and the way her eyes had softened when she looked at him. He knew he should have kept things professional, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. He wasn't sure how much longer he could ignore it. His attraction to her was growing, and no matter how hard he tried to focus on the work, it kept creeping back into his thoughts. Then, just as he was getting lost in his own mind, Sarah walked into the shop, looking as poised and confident as ever. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. Danny nodded, his heart rate picking up. "What's up?" "I've been thinking," she began, walking over to him, "about what you said last night, about what you're really doing here." Danny swallowed, the words from their conversation playing back in his mind. "I meant what I said." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know, but there's something we need to address." Danny's stomach tightened. "What's that?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Us. The way we've been working together, the tension between us." Danny froze. He didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected her to confront it so directly. But here it was, the question he'd been avoiding. "Sarah," he started, his voice low, "I don't know what to say. I've tried to keep it professional, but it's hard." She nodded slowly. "I know, me too. But we can't keep ignoring this." Danny's heart raced. Was this the moment? Would they finally talk about what had been building between them for weeks? Or would it all come crashing down? The tension between them hung in the air, thick and palpable. Sarah stood there, her gaze unwavering, as if waiting for Danny to make a move. But Danny felt frozen, unsure of what to say or do next. He wasn't used to this, used to the quiet, steady rhythm of his shop, the predictability of the work. But this was new. This was territory he had never ventured into. "I don't know what you want from me, Sarah," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't know what this is between us. I've never had to deal with this kind of thing before." Sarah's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the walls between them came down. "I don't want anything from you, Danny. I'm just trying to be honest. I can't pretend this doesn't exist anymore. Not with you." Danny's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't backing down. She was laying it all out there. And for the first time he realized how much he had been avoiding it, avoiding her, avoiding the truth. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "But what are we supposed to do with it, Sarah? You're my boss. We can't just pretend it doesn't matter. It does." She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming, but not in an uncomfortable way. "I know it's complicated, but I don't want this business to get in the way of what we're building here. Whatever this is, whatever it could be." Danny met her gaze, his throat tight. It was there, that thing between them. It wasn't just chemistry anymore. It was something deeper, something real. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I've spent my whole life building this garage, making it my own. And now everything's changing. I don't know if I can change with it." Sarah's expression was soft, almost tender. "I'm not asking you to change who you are, Danny. I just want us to face this together. I don't want to lose what we have, but I also don't want to let fear stop us from having more." The words hung in the air, lingering between them. Danny felt the weight of them, the weight of his own fears. He had spent his entire life running this place. But was it worth it if it meant losing the chance for something more? Something real? "I don't know if I can take that leap," he said quietly. Sarah stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You don't have to decide all at once. Just don't shut me out. Don't shut us out." Danny didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the floor, wrestling with his own thoughts. Could he really do this? Could he risk everything, his shop, his stability, his entire world, for something he wasn't sure he was ready for? Finally, he looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty, but also something else, something he couldn't name. "I don't know what this will look like, but I'm willing to try." Sarah's face broke into a smile, one that was full of relief and hope. That's all I'm asking for. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. The garage, once a quiet, somewhat neglected place, was now buzzing with life. Sarah's vision for the business was coming to fruition, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. The customers returned, not just for the repairs, but for the new energy that filled the place. Danny couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride every time he saw someone walk through the door, knowing that this was, in part, his doing. But it wasn't just the business that was changing. Danny and Sarah's relationship evolved too. They began spending more time together, not just in the shop but outside of it as well. Dinner after late nights at the garage, walks around the block to clear their heads, shared moments of laughter and silence that spoke more than words ever could. They were no longer just business partners. They were something more. And every time their hands brushed as they worked side by side, every glance exchanged across the room, Danny could feel the pull between them growing stronger. But with each passing day, the fear of what they were becoming crept back into his mind. They were treading dangerous ground. What would happen when their feelings for each other collided with their professional lives? Could they keep the balance intact, or would everything they had worked for come crashing down? It wasn't just the fear of the business that held him back. It was the fear of losing her, of giving in to something that might break them both. And yet, when Sarah walked into the garage one morning, her smile bright and her eyes full of purpose, Danny couldn't help but feel a surge of something that went beyond fear, something that felt like hope. It all came to a head one afternoon when Sarah walked into Danny's office, her expression more serious than usual. She stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. "We need to talk," she said, her voice a little too calm for Danny's liking. Danny dropped the wrench he was holding and turned to face her, feeling a sudden sense of dread. "What's wrong?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "The bank called. They're not happy with the progress we've made. They're giving us a week to prove ourselves, or they're pulling the plug on the loan. The garage is at risk again, Danny." Danny's stomach dropped. He had feared this moment. The pressure of running the garage, of keeping everything afloat, was always lurking in the background. But now it was right in front of him. "I thought we had more time," Danny muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We did," Sarah replied, her voice soft but firm. "But time's up. We need to act fast. If we don't get the numbers up by the end of the week, we're done." Danny stared at her, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. Everything he had worked for, everything they had built, was hanging by a thread. He could feel the familiar knot of panic rise in his chest. "Do you think we can do it?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. Sarah looked at him, her eyes steady. "I believe in us, Danny. I believe in this garage. But I can't do this alone. I need you. I need you to believe in it, too." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Danny just stood there, torn between his fear of failure and his desire to fight for what they had. He had always fought for what mattered, but this time it wasn't just about the garage. It was about something more. "I'm with you," he said finally, his voice stronger than he felt. "We'll do whatever it takes." Sarah smiled, her relief palpable. "I knew you'd say that." The next few days were a blur of frantic energy. Danny and Sarah worked late into the night, putting together a plan to save the garage. They cut costs, streamlined operations, and reached out to old customers, hoping for a surge of business that would be enough to keep the bank off their backs. The pressure was immense, and Danny felt every bit of it. But as the days passed, he started to see something he hadn't before. He started to see a future. Not just for the garage, but for him and Sarah. They weren't just fighting for the business anymore. They were fighting for each other. On the last day of the deadline, the numbers were in. Danny and Sarah stood in the office, staring at the final tally. They had made it, just barely, but they had done it. Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining with pride. "We did it, Danny. We saved the garage." He smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. We did it together. And for the first time in a long time, Danny realized that everything had changed. Not just the garage, but his life. And the woman standing next to him was no longer just his business partner. She was someone he couldn't imagine his future without. With the garage saved, things settled into a new normal. The pressure of the looming deadline was gone, and the future seemed brighter than it had in months. But for Danny and Sarah, there was still one thing left to confront. One evening, as they closed up shop together, Danny turned to Sarah, his voice steady. "We need to talk." Sarah paused, meeting his gaze. "About what?" "This," Danny said, gesturing between them, "about what's been happening between us." Her expression softened, and for a moment Danny saw the vulnerability in her eyes that she had always kept hidden. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too." Danny took a deep breath, his heart racing. "I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to lose you." Sarah stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. "You won't. I'm not going anywhere, Danny, but we need to take this one step at a time." Danny nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. For the first time in his life, he was ready to take that step, ready to move forward, not just with the garage, but with her. They stood there in the quiet of the shop they had saved, knowing that this was just the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of everything they had fought for began to settle into Danny's chest. The garage was thriving again. The customers were coming back, the repairs were rolling in, and the future seemed brighter than it had in months. But despite all the success, there was something else that loomed in the background, something he couldn't ignore. His relationship with Sarah? It had always been complicated, even before the garage was on the line. The pull between them was undeniable, the chemistry between them something they could no longer deny. But Danny couldn't shake the fear that everything they had worked for could come crashing down if they weren't careful. He had always been a man of routine, a man of simplicity. Love? That was something he hadn't planned for. One night after they had finished closing the garage, Sarah asked him to stay behind for a drink. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else in them, something softer, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. Danny agreed, though his mind was still occupied with the day's repairs and the growing list of things to do. But as the minutes passed and the two of them shared a quiet drink, the conversation shifted. "I know things between us haven't been easy," Sarah began, her voice steady but filled with an emotion Danny couldn't quite place. "But I want you to know, I'm not just here for the business. I'm here for you too." Danny didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a sip of his beer, the cool liquid sliding down his throat, but it didn't ease the tightness that had settled in his chest. "Sarah, we've both been through a lot. This garage, it's been our focus, and I get it. But I'm scared. Scared that if we let ourselves get too close, we'll lose everything we've worked for. It's not just about the garage anymore, it's about us." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, Danny saw the weight of her own fears. She reached out and placed her hand over his. "I know. I'm scared too. But I'm willing to take that risk if you are. We've already been through so much, Danny. We can't keep running from what's between us." Danny's heart hammered in his chest as he looked into her eyes. There was no hiding the truth anymore. There was something more between them, something deeper, and he knew he couldn't keep denying it. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "Okay, I'm in." The decision to finally acknowledge their feelings was easier said than done. In the days that followed, Danny and Sarah tried to navigate the delicate balance between business partners and something more. It was as though every move they made was being watched, by themselves, by each other, and by everyone else in the shop. The tension was almost unbearable, especially when they were alone together. Their eyes would meet, and in those moments it felt as if the whole world disappeared. But reality had a way of pulling them back, reminding them of what was at stake. Danny kept his focus on the garage, working harder than ever, throwing himself into the repairs and the customer service. He couldn't help it. That was his world. But it didn't stop him from feeling Sarah's presence everywhere. Every time she walked into the garage, every time she smiled at him, it made his heart race in a way he couldn't control. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last customer left the garage, Sarah lingered in the office. Danny stood by the workbench cleaning his tools, avoiding her gaze. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. "Danny," Sarah finally spoke, breaking the quiet. Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know this isn't easy, but we need to talk. We can't keep avoiding this." He looked up at her, his heart pounding. "I'm not avoiding it," he replied, his voice rough. "I'm just trying to keep my head straight. What we're doing, it's complicated, and I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending like everything's fine when I feel like I'm walking a tightrope every time I see you." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Danny, we're not pretending. We're both scared, but that's not enough to stop us from trying. We've already taken a huge step by getting this place back on track. Don't you think we've earned the right to take this next step?" Danny didn't know how to respond. His mind was racing, torn between the fear of losing everything and the desire to take a chance on something that felt right. But before he could say anything, Sarah reached out, her hand resting on his arm. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking you to be honest with me, with yourself." He met her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly, "but I know I don't want to lose you." Her smile was the answer he needed. The days following their conversation were both the hardest and the easiest. They tried to maintain their professional relationship, but the weight of their feelings for each other was impossible to ignore. Every conversation seemed to carry more weight now, every glance more meaningful. And every time Sarah reached out to him, whether it was to discuss the business or simply to ask how his day had been, it felt like something more. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Danny found himself standing at the front of the garage, staring out into the street. The town was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally. But there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about. He turned to find Sarah standing beside him, her presence calm and steady. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood next to him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was the kind of silence they had come to share, one that spoke volumes without saying a word. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just walking away from everything and starting over somewhere new?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Every day," she replied softly. "But then I remember why I'm here, why I'm doing this. It's not just about the business, it's about something more." Danny's heart skipped a beat. "What's that?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. "It's about us, Danny. It's about what we've built together, and no matter what happens, I want to be here, with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. Danny took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not ready to walk away either," he said, his voice steady. Sarah smiled, and in that smile, Danny found the strength to face whatever came next. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, Danny knew they were moving forward together, and that was enough. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Danny and Sarah grew deeper, more intertwined, and yet more complicated. They had both committed to the garage, to each other, but there were still moments when the weight of their decisions seemed too much to bear. The line between business and personal was thin, and the strain of balancing both sides began to take its toll. One particularly stressful day, a disagreement over the direction of the garage left them both on edge. The tension between them was palpable, the silence after their argument suffocating. Danny had never been good with confrontation, and now with Sarah, it felt even harder. He wanted to be strong, to fight for what they were building, but he also wanted to keep the peace. Later that evening, when the shop was closed and the world outside was quiet, Danny found Sarah in the office. She was sitting at the desk, her head in her hands, clearly exhausted. He stood in the doorway, unsure of how to approach her. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she muttered, not looking up. Danny stepped closer, his voice soft. "You're doing the best you can, and so am I. We just have to learn to work through it, together." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. There was vulnerability in her eyes that Danny hadn't seen before, and it made his heart ache. "I don't want to lose this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny crossed the room and knelt beside her, placing a hand on hers. "We won't lose it, not if we keep fighting. Together." And for the first time in weeks, they both allowed themselves to believe it. As spring turned into summer, Danny and Sarah faced new challenges, some personal, some professional, but they found themselves growing stronger together. The garage was thriving. Their relationship was evolving, and despite the setbacks, they both knew they were heading in the right direction. But then, just as things seemed to be stabilizing, an unexpected obstacle arose. Sarah received an offer for the garage, a tempting deal from a larger company that wanted to buy her out. It was the kind of offer that could secure her financial future, a deal that would make everything they had worked for seem insignificant in comparison. She stood in front of Danny, the papers in her hands, torn between the security of the deal and the future they had built together. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaky. "This could change everything, but it would mean giving up everything we've worked for." Danny didn't hesitate. "You have to do what feels right, Sarah, but whatever happens, we'll face it together." Sarah's decision was made, and it wasn't the one anyone had expected. She turned down the buyout offer, choosing instead to stay with Danny and continue building the business. It wasn't an easy decision, and the weeks that followed were filled with uncertainty. But they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Their bond grew even stronger as they worked through the challenges, learning to trust each other more deeply than ever before. And with every passing day, Danny realized that he had found something more than just a partner in business. He had found someone who understood him, who challenged him, and who stood by him no matter what. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. The days that followed Sarah's decision to turn down the buyout offer were filled with a new sense of uncertainty. The garage, which had once felt like their safe haven, now seemed to carry an invisible weight, one that neither of them could ignore. Despite the tension in the air, Danny did his best to focus on the work, pushing through the long hours, fixing cars, keeping the shop running smoothly. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. There was something bigger at play between him and Sarah. They couldn't avoid it forever, the unspoken things that hung between them, questions about the future, about their relationship, about what it meant for both of them. Every day it felt as though they were walking a tightrope, the balance between their professional lives and personal feelings becoming harder to maintain. One evening, after closing the garage, Danny stayed behind to finish up some paperwork. Sarah was still there, as always, working on new plans for the shop's next steps. He hadn't said much to her all day. He couldn't. He didn't know what to say, how to approach her without risking everything. "Danny," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence, "we need to talk." He froze, setting the papers down. There it was, the conversation they had both been avoiding. He nodded, not trusting his voice. He didn't know if he was ready for this. They had built so much together, and the thought of destroying it with one conversation made him sick to his stomach. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to gauge his thoughts. "I know things haven't been easy between us, but I need to know, what do we do now?" Danny's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "About this," she gestured between them. "About us? We can't keep pretending like everything's fine. We've been through so much, Danny, and now I don't know if we're stronger or if we're just hanging on because it's easier than letting go." His heart thudded in his chest, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. He had always been so sure about what he wanted in his life, but with Sarah, everything was different. She had turned his world upside down in the best possible way, but now he wasn't sure where that left him. He was terrified of losing her, terrified of losing everything they had worked for. "I don't want to lose you," Danny admitted, his voice thick with emotion. She stepped closer to him, her hands resting on the edge of the counter. "Then we have to make a decision. We have to decide if we're in this together, if we're willing to face everything as a team, the business, our relationship, everything." The weight of her words hung in the air. Danny's mind raced. He had always been the steady one, the one who kept everything together, but now everything was spinning out of control. The fear of losing Sarah, the fear of not being able to balance it all. He didn't know if he was strong enough to handle it. "I'm scared," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that if we keep going like this, we're going to lose everything. The garage. Us." Sarah reached out, gently touching his arm. "Danny, we're not going to lose it, but we have to make this work. We can't keep running from it. Not anymore." He nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he could breathe again. They would face it together, no matter what. The next few weeks brought a new rhythm to their lives. The garage continued to thrive under their joint leadership, but now everything felt different. Danny and Sarah were no longer just business partners, they were partners in every sense of the word. There were still moments of tension, moments where the balance between their personal and professional lives seemed impossible, but they worked through it. They had to. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of repairs, Sarah suggested they take a walk. It was the first time in a while they had done anything outside of work. Danny agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation they had just begun was far from over. As they walked down the quiet street, the world seemed to slow down. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt still, as if time had paused for them to catch up. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over everything. Sarah turned to him, her face serious, but her eyes warm. "I know we've been through a lot," she said, her voice quiet, "but I want you to know something." Danny looked at her, his heart racing. "What?" She smiled softly, the weight of her words clear. "I'm not just here for the garage, Danny. I'm here for you. I always have been." The simplicity of her words hit him like a wave, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. He had been so focused on the business, on the pressure, on the fear of failure, that he had almost forgotten what they were really fighting for. It wasn't just about the garage. It was about them. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah laughed softly, a sound that made his chest tighten. "You do. You deserve everything, Danny, and I want to be here with you, for everything that's coming next, for the garage, for us." Danny stopped walking, turning to face her. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he realized something. He didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to know exactly what was coming next. They just needed to be in it together. "I'm ready," he said quietly, his heart finally at peace. Sarah's smile widened and she stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Good, because I am too." It wasn't long after that when the first major test of their partnership came. A rival auto shop in town, one that had been struggling for years, suddenly got a large contract with a local company. It was a big deal, one that would bring in a lot of business. And with that, the competition between the shops grew fierce. It wasn't just about cars anymore, it was about survival. Danny and Sarah found themselves fighting harder than ever to keep the garage afloat. They worked late into the night, making calls, bringing in new clients, trying everything they could to keep the momentum going. The pressure was immense, and the stress began to show. One night, after an especially long day, Danny and Sarah sat in the office, staring at the numbers on the spreadsheet. Their financials were tighter than ever. The competitor was growing stronger, and it felt like they were on the brink of losing everything. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Danny admitted, rubbing his eyes. "The bills are piling up, and I don't see how we're going to make it through." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her eyes focused on the numbers in front of her. Finally, she looked up, her expression resolute. "We're not giving up, Danny. Not now, not ever. We've come too far." Danny looked at her, his heart heavy. "But what if it's not enough?" "It will be enough," Sarah said firmly, "because we're in this together. And together, we're unstoppable." Her confidence, her unwavering belief in them, ignited something in Danny. He had spent so much time worrying, so much time doubting, but in that moment he realized that all they needed was each other. If they fought together, they could survive anything. They worked harder than ever in the following weeks, pushing through the challenges, the doubts, and the exhaustion. Slowly, they turned things around. The garage began to see more business. New customers were flocking in, and they even managed to secure a few big contracts. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And as they stood together, looking at the success they had built, Danny knew one thing for sure. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Sarah by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, as the sun rose over the garage, Danny and Sarah stood side by side, looking out at the future they had worked so hard to create. They had faced the worst together and had come out on the other side stronger than ever. It wasn't just about the garage anymore. It was about them, their shared dreams, and the life they were building. No matter what challenges the future held, Danny knew one thing for certain: they would face them together. And that was all that mattered.